Beast filth belongs with the beasts, doesn't it, Kira? The words sliced through the morning air like claws through skin. Kira felt them settle into that familiar hollow space in her chest, the place where hope used to live before she learned better. She kept her eyes down, her hands steady as she continued scrubbing the stone floor of the war beast pen with practiced invisibility. The smell of wet hay and predator musk filled her lungs, but it was cleaner than the cruelty that followed her everywhere else in the compound. Marcus, the beta's son, stood above her with 3 other young wolves, their shadows falling across her work like storm clouds. She had learned long ago that acknowledging their presence only made it worse, that the best survival strategy was to become nothing, to disappear into the background until they grew bored and moved on to easier prey. "I asked you a question, Omega." His boot scraped against the stone, inches from her hand. "Or are you too stupid to understand simple words?" Kira's wolf stirred beneath her skin, a weak flutter of defiance that she quickly suppressed. Her wolf had always been small, pale, unremarkable, just like her. She pressed the scrub brush harder against the floor, watching dirty water swirl around the drain. That had always been enough. Keep quiet, keep working, keep breathing, survive another day. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. The command carried the weight of his bloodline, the authority that came from being born to wolves who mattered. Kira raised her head slowly, meeting his cold blue eyes for exactly the required moment before looking away again. She had perfected this dance over 18 years of living at the bottom of the pack hierarchy. A moment of acknowledgement to show respect, then back to invisible servitude where she belonged. That's better. Marcus's smile was all teeth and malice. "Now answer me. Beast filth belongs with beasts, doesn't it?" "Yes, sir," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "What was that? I couldn't hear you over the sound of your pathetic existence." "Yes, sir," she repeated, louder this time. "Beast filth belongs with beasts." The group laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls of the pen. Behind the heavy iron barriers, the war beasts stirred restlessly. These creatures were the pride of the northern pack, massive wolves bred for battle and trained for killing, but something in their movement suggested awareness of the cruelty happening just beyond their reach. Their golden eyes tracked the interaction with an intelligence that made Kira's skin prickle. "Good girl," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "At least you know your place. Though I suppose it's fitting that the pack's only unclaimed Omega spends her days shoveling shit. What else would someone like you be good for?" Someone like her. The phrase hung in the air like a curse. Someone with no family name, no bloodline worth mentioning, no wolf strong enough to earn respect. Someone who had been found as an infant on the pack's border with no explanation, no parents, no legacy, except the charity that kept her fed and housed in exchange for the work no one else wanted to do. Kira dipped her brush back into the bucket, watching the water darken with grime. The motion was automatic, soothing in its repetition. She had cleaned these pens every morning for 3 years, ever since she turned 15 and was deemed old enough for real work. The war beasts had become her only companions, the only creatures in the pack who didn't look at her with disgust or pity or casual cruelty. "The Alpha King arrives today," Marcus continued, clearly not finished with his entertainment. "Can you imagine? The most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, coming here for the bonding ceremony. He'll choose his Luna from the finest daughters of the finest families, wolves with bloodlines that trace back centuries. And here you are, scrubbing floors like the servant you were born to be." The bonding ceremony. Kira had heard the pack buzzing about it for weeks, the anticipation electric in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Alpha King Darius Blackthorn, ruler of the Northern Territories, would choose his mate from among the eligible females of the allied packs. It was an honour that would elevate not just the chosen female, but her entire family line. The political implications were staggering, alliances that would reshape the power structure of their world. Lady Seraphina Silvermoon was the expected choice, of course. Beautiful, noble-born, trained in politics and warfare since childhood. She carried the blood of ancient alphas in her veins, and her family's military strength was legendary. The match was so obvious that most of the pack spoke of it as inevitable, a foregone conclusion wrapped in the ceremony of tradition. Lady Seraphina will make a perfect Lunar Queen, one of Marcus's companions said, as if reading Kira's thoughts. Beautiful, powerful, worthy, everything a true alpha's mate should be. Unlike some people, Marcus added with a pointed look at Kira, some people are born to serve, born to be nothing. Born to be nothing. The words echoed in her head as she continued scrubbing, each stroke of the brush a meditation on her place in the world. She had been told those words or variations of them so many times that they had become part of her identity, woven into her sense of self like threads in a tapestry. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when she was alone with the war beasts, Kira wondered if there might be more to her story. Sometimes she caught the creatures watching her with something that looked almost like recognition, as if they saw something in her that the rest of the pack missed. When she spoke to them in soft whispers, they calmed in ways that puzzled their handlers. When she touched their fur through the bars, they leaned into her hand with a gentleness they showed no one else. The massive beast in the centre pen, the one they called Fenris, was the most mysterious of all. Black as midnight with scars that spoke of countless battles, he was said to be the Alpha King's personal war companion, a creature so fierce that even experienced warriors approached him with caution. But when Kira worked near his enclosure, Fenris would move to the front of his cage and watch her with intelligent golden eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "What are you thinking about, Omega?" Marcus's voice cut through her wandering thoughts. "Daydreaming about something above your station?" Kira shook her head quickly, focusing back on her work. The last thing she needed was to give them more ammunition for their cruelty. "Smart girl," Marcus said. "Remember your place. Remember what you are." What she was, a nobody, a nothing, an Omega without a family, without a future, without any hope of being more than what she had always been. The group finally moved on, their laughter fading as they headed toward the main compound to prepare for the Alpha King's arrival. Kira remained on her knees, scrubbing floors that were already clean, trying to work the tension out of her shoulders and the pain out of her chest. This was her life. This was all it would ever be. Behind her, Fenris let out a low sound that was almost like a whimper, as if the great beast understood her suffering and sympathized with it. She turned to look at him, meeting those golden eyes that held far too much intelligence for a simple war beast. "I know," she whispered to him, her voice so quiet it barely carried across the space between them. "I know you see it too, but there's nothing either of us can do about it." Fenris tilted his massive head, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment she felt something stir between them, a connection she couldn't name or understand. Then the moment passed, and she turned back to her work, pushing the strange feeling down into that hollow space in her chest where she kept all the things that hurt too much to acknowledge. Today, the Alpha King would arrive. Today he would begin the process of choosing his mate. And tomorrow Kira would still be here, scrubbing floors and taking insults and pretending that being nothing was enough. The water in her bucket had turned black with grime, but she kept scrubbing anyway, each stroke a reminder of her place in the world. Born to serve, born to be invisible, born to be nothing. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between heartbeats, she wondered if the beasts could see something that everyone else missed. Something that even she didn't understand yet. Something that might change everything. 3 weeks after the mating ceremony, Kira faced her first real test as Lunar Queen when the Riverside Pack brought their territorial dispute to the royal court. The great hall had been transformed for the formal audience, its soaring walls hung with banners representing every allied house, while the throne platform had been expanded to accommodate both the Alpha King's seat and the newly carved lunar throne beside it. Kira settled into the chair that had been crafted specifically for her, its silver inlaid design incorporating symbols from the ancient Silver Wolf bloodline, and tried to project the kind of confidence that came naturally to those born to rule. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just a month ago she had been scrubbing floors in this very hall, invisible and dismissed by everyone who passed. Now she sat beside Darius as an equal, her word carrying weight that could reshape their world with a single decree. The dispute concerns grazing rights along the Silverbrook tributary, Elder Matthias explained, his weathered face grave with the seriousness of the matter. Both the Riverside Pack and the Mountain Clan claim ancestral hunting grounds that have become critical due to the drought affecting the northern pastures. Kira listened intently as representatives from both groups presented their cases, each side convinced of the righteousness of their position and the injustice of their opponents' claims. It was exactly the kind of problem that had no clear solution, where tradition and need collided in ways that could escalate into violence if handled poorly. "The Riverside Wolves have used those grounds for 3 generations, argued Beta Samuel, his voice tight with frustration. "Our elders remember hunting there as cubs, learning the paths from their parents and grandparents. Those lands are part of our heritage." "Heritage built on theft," countered clan leader Nora, her eyes flashing with controlled anger. "The mountain streams have always been our territory, marked by our scent and protected by our blood. The river wolves expanded during the chaos of the Great Purge, taking what was never theirs to claim." The Great Purge. Even now, decades later, the consequences of that violent period continued to ripple through their world. Boundaries had shifted, populations had been displaced, and traditional territories had been claimed by whoever was strong enough to hold them. It was a legacy of chaos that created problems like this one, where both sides had legitimate claims based on different definitions of legitimacy. Darius leaned forward in his throne, his presence commanding immediate attention from all parties. "What evidence do you offer for your competing claims?" Both groups produced their proof. Maps drawn by pack historians, testimony from elders who remembered the old boundaries, territorial markers that had been maintained for generations. The evidence was compelling on both sides, which made the decision even more difficult. But as Kira studied the information presented, something caught her attention that the others had missed. "Beta Samuel," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, "you mentioned that your pack learned to hunt in those grounds during the time after the Great Purge. Can you be more specific about when that began?" "The late spring of the year following Queen Lyralee's death," Samuel replied, consulting his notes. "My grandfather spoke of it often, how they were forced to expand their territory when the traditional grounds became unavailable." Kira felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in her mind. "And clan leader Nora, your people retreated to the higher mountain passes during that same period, correct? When the purge hunters were active in the lowlands?" "Yes," Nora confirmed, her expression showing growing understanding. "We were forced to abandon much of our traditional territory to avoid the killing squads. We assumed the river wolves would respect the temporary nature of that displacement." "But communication broke down during the chaos," Kira continued, her voice taking on the authority she had discovered in herself during these past weeks. Both groups did what they had to do to survive, and in the aftermath neither side fully understood what the other had sacrificed. The hall had grown quiet as people began to grasp the deeper truth behind the territorial dispute. This wasn't about greed or expansion. It was about 2 groups of survivors trying to rebuild after a traumatic period that had shattered their world. "The drought has made this a crisis instead of just a disagreement," Kira observed. "But the solution isn't about determining who has the stronger claim. It's about remembering that we all survived the same catastrophe and we're stronger when we work together rather than fighting over scraps." She stood from her throne, feeling the weight of everyone's attention as she moved to the great map that dominated one wall of the hall. The territories were marked in different colours, showing the current boundaries that had evolved from decades of pragmatic survival rather than ancient law. "The Silverbrook tributary has 3 major branches," she said, tracing the waterways with her finger. "The main channel runs through what is now Riverside Pact territory, but the northern and southern branches extend into the mountain foothills. Instead of fighting over the same resources, why not develop a shared management system that plays to each group's strengths?" Both leaders moved closer to examine the map, their previous antagonism replaced by curiosity about what their Lunar Queen was proposing. "The Riverside Pack has experience with lowland hunting and water management," Kira continued. "The Mountain Clan knows the high country and seasonal migration patterns. Together, you could create a resource-sharing agreement that gives both groups access to what they need while maximizing the effectiveness of your hunting efforts." "Shared territory?" Beta Samuel asked, his voice uncertain. "Coordinated territory," Kira corrected. "Each group maintains their primary holdings, but you establish seasonal agreements for hunting parties, water access, and emergency support. During drought years like this one, the mountain wolves get priority access to the lower streams, while the river wolves get support for their families in the high country camps." The solution was elegant in its simplicity, addressing the practical needs that had created the dispute, while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of both parties. More importantly, it established precedent for cooperation rather than competition, something their world desperately needed after decades of division. "The Lunar Queen speaks wisdom," Darius said, his voice carrying approval that warmed Kira's heart. "Do both parties accept this proposed resolution?" The negotiations took another hour, but the framework Kira had established provided the foundation for an agreement that satisfied everyone involved. Watching the former enemies shake hands and begin planning their cooperation filled her with a satisfaction she had never experienced before. This was what leadership felt like, not the empty authority of position or birth, but the genuine power to make people's lives better through wisdom and compassion. "Well done," Eldris Mira murmured as the petitioners filed out of the hall. "You see connections that others miss, solutions that serve everyone rather than just the strongest." "I spent 18 years watching people fight over scraps," Kira replied quietly. "I learned that there's usually enough for everyone if you're willing to think creatively about sharing." As the formal court session concluded and the hall began to empty, Darius approached her throne with the kind of smile that made her heart skip beats even after weeks of marriage. "My brilliant queen," he said, pulling her into his arms, despite the public setting. "That was masterfully handled." "I had a good teacher," she replied, leaning into his warmth and strength. "No," Darius said seriously. "What you did today, that came from inside you. That's the kind of wisdom that can't be taught, only discovered." The mate bond hummed between them with contentment and pride, 2 souls working in perfect harmony to serve their people. But beneath that satisfaction was something else, something that made Kira's breath catch with sudden understanding. "Darius," she whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. He stiffened, his enhanced senses picking up on the change in her scent that she was just beginning to notice herself. "Kira, I think—" She met his eyes, seeing her own wonder reflected in their storm-dark depths. "I think we're going to have a child." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and possibility. An heir to secure the bloodline, a symbol of their unified rule, a testament to the love that had grown from impossible recognition to eternal bond. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Not yet," she admitted, "but something feels different. Something feels right." Darius swept her into his arms, spinning her around the empty throne room with joyous laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. When he finally set her down, his hands settled on her waist with reverent care. Our child, he said wonderingly, the next generation of both bloodlines. The future we're building, Kira agreed, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones with the weight of destiny. Outside the great hall, their territory stretched in all directions, filled with people who looked to them for guidance and protection. It was a responsibility that would have terrified the servant girl she had once been, but the queen she had become embraced it with confidence born of love and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new disputes to resolve, new tests of their leadership. But tonight they would celebrate the possibility of new life, the continuation of bloodlines that had survived persecution and exile to reclaim their rightful place. The Silver Wolf bloodline lived on, and their legacy would be one of wisdom, compassion, and the kind of love that could reshape the world. The challenge came at dawn, delivered by a messenger whose arrogance preceded him like a storm front rolling across the compound. Alpha Garrett of the Northern Pack stood in the great courtyard flanked by 50 of his strongest warriors, their battle scars and predatory stances making their intentions unmistakably clear. They had come for war, and they wanted everyone to know it. "I formally dispute the legitimacy of this so-called Lunar Queen," Garrett announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard where pack members had gathered to witness the confrontation. "A servant girl with questionable bloodline claims cannot rule over true-born alphas. I demand trial by combat to settle this matter once and for all." Kira stood on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, one hand resting protectively over her stomach where new life grew. 3 months had passed since the pregnancy was confirmed, and though she barely showed yet, the child within her had become the centre of both her hopes and her fears. A challenge now, with an heir at stake, carried implications that went far beyond personal honour. "He questions my bloodline," she asked quietly, though her voice carried enough steel to make several nearby guards straighten with attention. "Garrett has never accepted the new order," Darius replied, his own tone deadly calm, despite the fury she could feel radiating through their mate bond. "He remembers the old days when might made right, when the strongest alpha took whatever they wanted without regard for justice or wisdom." Below them, the Northern Pack Alpha continued his provocations, clearly playing to the crowd of witnesses who had come to see how their Lunar Queen would respond to such a direct challenge. "The Silver Wolf bloodline died with Queen Lyralee," Garrett declared. "This girl is nothing but a clever pretender, using parlour tricks and beast magic to fool the weak-minded. I'll prove it by defeating her in single combat, as is my right under the ancient laws." "Ancient laws," Kira repeated, feeling something dangerous stir in her chest. Not just her wolf, but something deeper, something that connected her to generations of queens who had faced similar challenges to their authority. "You don't have to accept," Darius said urgently. "Your condition gives you every right to name a champion. I'll fight in your place, settle this quickly." "No." Kira's voice held a finality that made him turn to study her face. "This isn't about combat prowess. This is about whether the pack will accept a Luna who hides behind her mate when challenged. If I don't face him myself, there will always be doubts. Kira, you're carrying our child. The risk is mine to take," she interrupted, her hand moving to touch his cheek with infinite tenderness. "Trust me, my love. Trust in what we've built together." The mate bond hummed with his reluctance, his desperate need to protect her warring with his understanding of what leadership sometimes demanded. But beneath that conflict was something else, absolute faith in her abilities, confidence in the queen she had become. "Together," he said finally, "whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," she agreed. They descended to the courtyard where Alpha Garrett waited with barely contained smugness, clearly expecting an easy victory over a pregnant female who had been nobody just months ago. His warriors arrayed themselves in a loose circle around the combat area, their confidence in their leader's abilities written plainly across their scarred faces. "I accept your challenge," Kira announced, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. Single combat, shifted form witnessed by all present. Excellent, Garrett purred, already beginning to remove his ceremonial armour. This will be over quickly. Yes, Kira agreed, something in her tone making several of the more perceptive witnesses exchange nervous glances. It will. The shift that followed was a thing of beauty and terror in equal measure. Garrett's wolf was massive, easily one of the largest creatures anyone present had ever seen. Dark grey fur rippled over muscles built through decades of warfare, and his yellow eyes blazed with the confidence of someone who had never lost a challenge. He was everything the old order represented: raw power, brutal efficiency, strength untempered by mercy or wisdom. But when Kira shifted, the very air seemed to change around her. Her silver wolf form was magnificent, easily matching Garrett's size despite her pregnancy. But it was more than just physical presence that made the watching crowd gasp. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge, the kind of authority that couldn't be learned or mimicked. This was royal blood made manifest, generations of breeding and bloodline power flowing through her like liquid lightning. The war beasts penned around the courtyard began to howl, their voices raised in recognition and support of their true alpha. Other wolves in the crowd felt the instinctive urge to submit, their bodies responding to a dominance that transcended mere physical strength. "Impossible," one of Garrett's warriors whispered. "That power, it's real." Garrett himself seemed shaken by the display, his confident swagger faltering as he faced something he hadn't expected. But he was too proud and too committed to back down now. The battle was over before it truly began. Garrett launched himself at Kira with killing intent, his massive form aimed at her throat in a strike meant to end things quickly. It was exactly the kind of brutal, straightforward attack that had served him well in countless previous battles. But Kira wasn't just any opponent. She was the heir to queens who had ruled through intelligence as much as strength, who had commanded loyalty through wisdom rather than fear. When she moved, it was with the fluid grace of someone who understood that true power came from precision, not brutality. She sidestepped Garrett's charge with minimal effort, allowing his momentum to carry him past her before striking with surgical accuracy at pressure points that dropped him to the ground gasping. The entire exchange took perhaps 3 seconds, but it demonstrated a level of skill and tactical thinking that left no doubt about the outcome. Garrett struggled to his feet, confusion and rage warring in his yellow eyes. "Lucky strike. Come at me directly, coward." "As you wish," Kira replied, and this time she did meet his charge head-on. The collision should have favoured the larger male, but instead Garrett found himself thrown backward with enough force to crack the stone courtyard where he landed. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and sent shock waves of pain through his body. But more devastating than the physical damage was the psychological blow. She was stronger than him, not through magic or trickery, but through the simple reality of royal bloodline power that made her naturally superior to any normal alpha. "Yield," Kira commanded, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that made every wolf present feel the urge to bare their throats in submission. "Acknowledge your Lunar Queen and spare yourself further embarrassment." Garrett's response was a roar of frustrated rage as he launched himself at her again, this time with the desperate fury of someone who understood that his entire worldview was crumbling around him. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration. Kira moved with the kind of lethal grace that spoke of perfect control, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage while avoiding anything that might threaten the child she carried. She was faster, stronger, and infinitely more skilled than her opponent, but more than that, she was fighting with the accumulated wisdom of generations of queens who had faced similar challenges. When Garrett finally collapsed, too battered and exhausted to continue, the silence in the courtyard was deafening. "I submit," he gasped, the words torn from his throat by the crushing weight of absolute defeat. "Do you acknowledge Kira Silvermoon as your rightful Lunar Queen?" Darius asked, his voice carrying across the courtyard with royal authority. I acknowledge her," Garrett whispered, shame and disbelief warring in his voice. The Northern Pack warriors who had come expecting easy victory now found themselves kneeling in submission to the Queen they had planned to see defeated. Some looked resentful, but others showed genuine respect for someone who had proven her strength in the most direct way possible. "Rise," Kira commanded, shifting back to human form with fluid grace. "You came here believing I was weak, unworthy of your respect. You have seen the truth now. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Garrett struggled to his feet, his human form showing the bruises and cuts that marked his thorough defeat. When he looked at Kira now, there was no mockery in his eyes, only the grudging respect of one warrior for another. "You fight like a queen," he said quietly. I was wrong about you." "Yes, you were," Kira agreed without malice, "but being wrong isn't a permanent condition. You can choose to learn from this experience, to become part of something better than the old ways of taking what you want through violence alone." She gestured to the assembled crowd, to the pack members who had witnessed this confrontation and seen their Luna prove her worth in the most primal way possible. "We are stronger when we work together," she continued, "when we use our power to protect rather than dominate, to build rather than destroy. That is the future I offer you if you're wise enough to accept it." The formal submission that followed would be remembered for generations, as Alpha Garrett and his warriors swore loyalty to the Lunar Queen, who had defeated them not through trickery or politics, but through the simple demonstration of superior strength and character. But for Kira, the most important moment came afterward, when Darius pulled her into his arms and she felt their child stir within her womb, as if celebrating the victory that had secured their future. "Our child will inherit a world where strength serves wisdom," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "And they'll learn from the strongest Lunar Queen the territories have ever known," Darius replied, his voice warm with pride and love. Around them, the pack began to disperse, but the impact of what they had witnessed would ripple through the northern territories for years to come. The Lunar Queen had faced challenge and proven herself worthy, not just through bloodline or marriage, but through the kind of personal strength that could not be questioned or denied. The Silver Wolf had returned, and she would never bow to anyone again. 6 months later, Kira stood in the same beast pens where her journey had begun, one hand resting on her rounded belly as she watched her newborn daughter sleep peacefully in Darius's arms. The irony was not lost on her. This place that had once represented her lowest point, where she had scrubbed floors and endured cruelty while believing herself to be nothing, had become a symbol of everything she had gained. The war beasts that had first recognized her true nature now served as guardians for the next generation of Silver Wolf royalty, their massive forms arranged in protective circles around the family they had claimed as their own. "She's perfect," Darius whispered, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that came from holding his firstborn child. Princess Lyralee, named for the grandmother she would never meet, but whose legacy lived on in her silver eyes, was indeed perfect in every way that mattered. The birth had been witnessed by pack leaders from across the Northern Territories, all of them eager to swear loyalty to the heir who represented the permanent joining of two powerful bloodlines. But more than political significance, the child symbolized hope, proof that the Silver Wolf line would continue into a new generation raised with love rather than fear. "Look at her eyes," Kira said softly, reaching out to stroke her daughter's tiny fist. "She already has the silver fire. She'll never have to hide what she is." Unlike her mother, Princess Lyralee would grow up knowing exactly who she was and what she represented. She would be trained from birth in the use of her power, taught to command beasts and lead people with the kind of wisdom that came from understanding both strength and compassion. Fenris, now elderly but still magnificent, padded closer to inspect the newest member of his pack. The great black beast had become something of a legend himself, the war creature who had been the first to recognize the hidden queen. His golden eyes were gentle as he studied the sleeping infant, and when he lowered his massive head in acknowledgement, it felt like a benediction. "He remembers," Kira said, scratching behind Fenris's ears with the same gentle touch she had used when she was nothing but a servant girl who found comfort in creatures others feared. "He remembers when I was nobody, cleaning his cage and whispering to him about dreams I didn't dare believe could come true." "You were never nobody," Darius said, the same words he had spoken to her in what felt like another lifetime. "You were always exactly who you were meant to be. The world just needed time to catch up." The pack had indeed caught up, and then some. The territories under their joint rule had prospered in ways that surprised even the most optimistic advisers. Trade agreements that had seemed impossible were now thriving partnerships. Territorial disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than violence, and the kind of cooperation Kira had pioneered in her first major decision had become the standard for how their people handled conflict. But perhaps more importantly, the changes had gone beyond politics and economics. Young wolves who had been dismissed for their lowly birth now found opportunities to prove their worth. Servants were treated with dignity rather than casual cruelty, and the idea that strength meant the right to dominate others was slowly being replaced by the understanding that true power existed to protect and serve. "Your Majesty," came a soft voice from the entrance to the beast pens. Kira turned to see Marcus approaching, the same young man who had tormented her with casual cruelty on the morning that changed everything. But the person who stood before her now bore little resemblance to the arrogant Beta's son, who had once called her beast filth. 6 months of seeing his former victim rule with wisdom and strength had humbled Marcus in ways that no amount of punishment could have achieved. He had requested permission to serve in the royal guard, claiming that he wanted to protect the queen he had once scorned, and after much consideration, Kira had granted his request. "The evening patrol reports are ready for your review," he said, his voice respectful in a way that would have been unimaginable just a year ago. "Thank you, Marcus," Kira replied, accepting the documents with the same grace she showed to every member of her service, regardless of their past relationship with her. As he turned to leave, she called his name softly. "Marcus?" "Yes, Your Majesty?" "Do you ever regret it, the way things changed?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. When he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I regret who I was," he said simply. "I regret the cruelty, the blindness, the assumption that birth determined worth. But I don't regret that you became our queen. The territories are better for it. I'm better for it." After he left, Kira found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The servant girl who had believed herself worthless was gone forever, but the lessons she had learned in that life, compassion for the overlooked, strength found in gentleness, the understanding that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their station, those lessons had become the foundation of her rule. "What are you thinking about?" Darius asked, settling beside her on the stone bench where she had once sat in despair, believing her life would never amount to anything more than cleaning up after creatures more valued than herself. "Destiny," she said, the same word they had spoken to each other in chambers that seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "Whether we create it or simply discover it. Does it matter?" Kira considered the question as she watched her daughter sleep, this perfect little person who represented the future they were building together. Around them, the war beasts rested peacefully, no longer symbols of violence and domination, but guardians of a new way of thinking about power and responsibility. "I used to think I was born to be nothing," she said finally, "that my life was predetermined by circumstances beyond my control. But maybe I was actually born for this moment, this choice to be something more than what the world expected." "Maybe we all were," Darius said, his arm tightening around her as Princess Lyralee stirred in her sleep, her tiny face peaceful in the torchlight. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their quiet moment, and Kira looked up to see a young servant girl, entering the pens with feed buckets, her head down and her movements careful in the way that spoke of someone trying to remain invisible. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, with the same defeated posture and careful anonymity that Kira remembered all too well. She moved between the enclosures with practiced efficiency, clearly accustomed to being overlooked and forgotten by everyone around her. But when one of the younger war beasts moved to the front of its cage and watched her with unusual interest, the girl paused. For just a moment she reached out to touch the creature's fur through the bars, and Kira saw the same gentle connection she had once shared with these magnificent beasts. "What's your name?" Kira called softly, not wanting to startle the girl. The servant spun around, her eyes wide with terror at being noticed by the Queen herself. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to disturb you. I was just—" "It's all right," Kira said gently, rising from the bench with her daughter still sleeping peacefully in her father's arms. "I asked for your name." "Mira, Your Majesty, like the Elderess, but I'm nobody important." Nobody important, the same words Kira had used to describe herself, the same invisible existence of someone who had learned that safety came from being overlooked. "Mira," Kira repeated, watching as the war beast pressed against the bars where the girl had touched it. "Do they always respond to you like that?" The girl's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry if I'm doing something wrong. I know I'm not supposed to—" "You're not in trouble," Kira assured her. "I'm asking because I understand. They used to respond to me the same way when I worked in these pens." The revelation clearly shocked young Mira, who stared at her queen with disbelief. "You worked here?" "For 3 years," Kira confirmed. "I cleaned these same cages, fed these same beasts, and believed myself to be exactly what you called yourself. Nobody important." She moved closer to the girl, seeing her own younger self in those uncertain eyes. "But I learned something that I want you to remember, Mira. Nobody is born to be nothing. We all have purpose, even when we can't see it yet. But I'm just a servant." "So was I," Kira said simply, "until the day I discovered that the world had been wrong about who I was supposed to be." As if summoned by their conversation, Fenris approached the bars where young Mira stood frozen with shock and wonder. The legendary war beast studied the girl with those intelligent golden eyes, and slowly, deliberately, he lowered his massive head in the same gesture of recognition he had first shown to Kira. The symbolism was unmistakable, and Kira felt tears prick her eyes as she watched destiny prepare to unfold once again. "Sometimes," she said, her voice warm with understanding and hope, "the most important people start out believing they're nobody at all." The future stretched before them, filled with possibilities and challenges that would test everything they had built. But as Kira looked at her sleeping daughter, at her mate who had seen worth where others saw only a servant, at the young girl who might discover her own greatness in time, she felt only gratitude. She had been born in shame and raised in dismissal, had spent 18 years believing herself worthless and destined for nothing more than invisible servitude. But those experiences had shaped her into someone who could rule with compassion, who understood that true strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The Alpha King's deadliest beast had lowered itself before a peasant girl, and the pack had gone mute with shock. But that was just the beginning of the story. The real tale was what happened next, when the peasant girl discovered she was a queen and changed not just her own world, but the world of everyone around her. Some stories end with the crown. The best ones begin there. The ground trembled beneath Kira's feet before she heard the howls. Deep, resonant calls that spoke of power and ancient bloodlines, they rolled across the compound like thunder announcing a storm. Every wolf in the territory felt it in their bones, that primal recognition of an alpha so dominant that even the earth seemed to bow in his presence. Kira's hands stilled on the feed bucket she was carrying, her weak wolf pressing low in submission to something she had never encountered before. Alpha King Darius Blackthorn had arrived. She could hear the commotion from the main courtyard, Voices raised in formal greetings, and the stamp of boots as pack members rushed to form proper reception lines. Everyone who mattered would be there, dressed in their finest ceremonial garb, ready to witness history as the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories chose his mate. Everyone except her. Kira hurried toward the war beast enclosures, hoping to finish her duties and disappear before the formal introductions began. The last thing she needed was to be caught in the open when the Alpha King's entourage arrived. Servants like her were meant to be invisible during important events, present only when needed and forgotten the moment their tasks were complete. But as she rounded the corner to the beast pens, her heart sank. The area was already bustling with activity. Royal guards in midnight blue uniforms were positioning themselves around the enclosures, their faces hard and alert. These beasts would be part of the ceremony, she realized, displayed as symbols of the Alpha King's power and the pack's strength. "You!" one of the guards barked when he spotted her. "Omega, get those creatures ready for presentation. The Alpha King wants to see the quality of our war beasts." Kira nodded quickly, setting down her bucket and moving toward the supply area where the ceremonial tack was stored. Her hands shook as she gathered the ornate harnesses and leads, each piece crafted from the finest leather and adorned with silver that caught the afternoon light. She had never been allowed to handle the ceremonial gear before, but there was no one else available. The other beast handlers were either too important to deal with an Omega or too busy preparing for their own roles in the ceremony. She started with the smaller beasts, the ones that were impressive but manageable. Her touch seemed to calm them as always, their restless pacing settling into watchful stillness as she worked. The strange connection she felt with these creatures had never made sense to her, but she had learned not to question it. It was the one thing in her life that brought her any measure of peace. The sound of approaching voices made her move faster. She could hear Alpha Marcus giving orders, his voice tight with the stress of managing such an important event. Lady Seraphina's melodic laugh drifted across the courtyard, confident and musical, the sound of someone who knew exactly what her future held. Kira had just finished with the third beast when the voices grew close enough to understand individual words. "The Alpha King's war beasts are legendary," Alpha Marcus was saying, his tone carefully respectful. "But I believe our own creatures will impress him. We've bred them for strength, intelligence, and absolute loyalty." "Loyalty is everything," came a voice that made every hair on Kira's body stand at attention. Deep, commanding, with an undertone of controlled power that spoke of absolute authority, it was the voice of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Someone who had been born to rule and had claimed that birthright with steel and fire. "Yes, Your Majesty," Alpha Marcus replied. "These beasts have never failed in battle, never shown weakness, never—" The conversation cut off abruptly, and Kira realized with growing horror that they had reached the war beast enclosures. She was still working with the fourth animal, a massive grey wolf with battle scars across his muzzle, and there was nowhere to hide. Panic clawed at her throat as she tried to make herself smaller, more invisible, hoping they would pass by without noticing the Omega crouched in the corner. "What is that creature?" The question came from the Alpha King himself, his voice cutting through the sudden silence like a blade. Kira's blood turned to ice as she realized he wasn't asking about the war beasts, he was asking about her. "That's just a servant, Your Majesty," Alpha Marcus said quickly, his embarrassment obvious. "An Omega who handles the beast care. I apologize for the disruption. Kira, remove yourself from—" "Wait!" The single word carried such absolute authority that every person in the area froze. Kira felt her wolf curl up inside her, instinctively recognizing the presence of an alpha so powerful that resistance wasn't even a concept. But something else stirred as well, something deeper and more primal that she didn't understand. "Look at me, Omega." The command resonated through her bones, impossible to ignore. Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, Kira raised her head and looked directly at the Alpha King, For the first time in her life, the world stopped. Darius Blackthorn was everything the stories said and more. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention and submission in equal measure. His dark hair was pulled back from a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and controlled power. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Dark as storm clouds, they held an intelligence and intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they stared at each other across the space that separated their worlds. Kira felt something shift inside her, a recognition that made no sense and terrified her with its intensity. Her wolf, that weak and pathetic creature that had never shown interest in anything, suddenly stirred with an awareness that made her gasp. The Alpha King's eyes widened slightly, and she watched as his nostrils flared, scenting the air between them. His expression shifted from idle curiosity to something she couldn't identify, something that made her skin feel too tight and her pulse race with a rhythm she had never experienced before. "What is your name?" His voice was quieter now, but no less commanding. Kira, your Majesty," she whispered, hating the way her voice shook. "Kira," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious, something worth remembering. It was the first time anyone had spoken her name without disgust or dismissal colouring the syllables. Behind him, she could see Lady Seraphina's perfect features arranged in a mask of confusion and growing displeasure. The beautiful woman's green eyes flicked between Kira and the Alpha King, clearly trying to understand why her intended mate was paying attention to a servant. "Your Majesty," Lady Seraphina said, her voice like honey over steel, "perhaps we should continue with the tour. I'm sure you're eager to see the rest of our territory before the ceremony begins." But the Alpha King didn't move. He continued to stare at Kira with an intensity that made her want to both run and step closer at the same time. Around them, the war beasts had grown restless, shifting and pacing in their enclosures as if they sensed something significant happening. That's when it happened. Fenris, the great black beast that had been the Alpha King's companion for over a decade, let out a sound that was part whine, part howl. Everyone turned toward his enclosure, expecting to see the legendary war beast displaying for his master. Instead, they watched in stunned silence as Fenris broke the reinforced lock on his cage door with a casual swipe of his massive paw. "Fenris, no!" one of the guards shouted, reaching for his weapon. But the Alpha King raised a hand, stopping the guard mid-draw. His eyes never left Kira's face as his legendary war beast pushed open the heavy cage door and stepped into the open courtyard. Kira should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to get away from a creature that had torn through enemy armies and left battlefields soaked with blood. This was Fenris, the terror of the Northern Territories, the beast that strong men crossed themselves to avoid. But as the massive black wolf approached her with measured steps, Kira felt no fear. Instead, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been written in the stars long before she was born. Fenris stopped directly in front of her, his golden eyes meeting hers with an intelligence that took her breath away. For a heartbeat that lasted forever, they looked at each other, predator and prey, legend and nobody. Then the great beast lowered his massive head in a gesture of submission that sent shockwaves through every person watching. Kira heard Lady Seraphina's sharp intake of breath, saw Alpha Marcus's face go pale with disbelief, felt the stunned silence of the assembled crowd like a physical weight. But all of that faded into background noise as she reached out with trembling fingers to touch the soft fur between Fenris's ears. The moment her skin made contact with the legendary beast, something electric passed between them. Power, recognition, truth. "Impossible," someone whispered, but Kira barely heard them. She was lost in the golden depths of Fenris's eyes, understanding passing between them in a language that had no words. The great beast leaned into her touch, a rumbling purr vibrating through his massive chest as he accepted her in ways that made no sense to anyone watching. When she finally looked up, still stroking Fenris's fur with reverent fingers, she found the Alpha King staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His dark eyes held a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, something that made her wolf stir with dangerous hope. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kira shook her head, as lost as he was. "I don't know, Your Majesty. I've always been able to... They just seem to..." "The beasts," Alpha Marcus said, his voice tight with disbelief. "They all calm for her. We thought it was just... We never imagined." The Alpha King took a step closer, and Kira felt her entire world shift on its axis. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes, could smell the scent of pine and winter storms that clung to his skin. Her wolf, that pathetic creature that had never shown interest in any male, suddenly surged to life with a need that terrified her. "All of them?" the Alpha King asked, never taking his eyes off Kira's face. "Everyone," Alpha Marcus confirmed. "But Your Majesty, she's just an Omega, a servant. There's no significance to..." "Look around you," the Alpha King said quietly. Everyone turned to see what he had noticed. Every war beast in the enclosure had moved to the front of their cages, pressing against the bars closest to where Kira stood with Fenris. They watched her with the same recognition she saw in the great black beast's eyes, the same impossible acceptance of something that shouldn't exist. "The pack goes mute," the Alpha King said, so quietly that only Kira could hear him. "When the deadliest beast bows to a peasant girl, the pack goes mute." His words sent shivers down her spine, not because of their meaning, but because of the way he looked at her when he said them, as if she was a puzzle he needed to solve, a mystery that had just upended everything he thought he knew about the world. Lady Seraphina cleared her throat delicately, reminding everyone of her presence. "Darius, darling, surely this is just some trick of animal training. Perhaps we should..." "No," the Alpha King said, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone freeze. "This is something else entirely." He looked at Kira for one more long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped back, the spell broken, the moment passing into memory. "Prepare them all for the ceremony," he ordered, but his eyes lingered on Kira even as he spoke to the handlers. "Every beast, and make sure..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Make sure the Omega is available if they need calming." It was a small thing, barely a acknowledgement, but it felt like the ground shifting beneath Kira's feet. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her as more than nothing. Someone had witnessed the impossible and chosen to acknowledge it rather than dismiss it. As the Alpha King turned to leave with his entourage, Fenris nuzzled against Kira's hand one final time before padding back to his enclosure. The great beast settled near the front of his cage, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Kira remained where she was, her heart racing and her mind reeling. What had just happened? What did it mean? And why did she feel like her entire world had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to understand? The ceremony would begin soon. The Alpha King would choose his Luna from among the worthy daughters of noble families. And tomorrow Kira would still be nothing. But for one impossible moment she had been something more, something that made legends bow their heads. The summons came at dusk, delivered by a stone-faced guard who looked at Kira like she was something unclean that had crawled out from under a rock. "The Alpha King requires your presence in his chambers," the guard said, his voice flat with disapproval. "Immediately." Kira's blood turned to ice. Around the servant quarters, conversation stopped mid-sentence as everyone turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from shock to morbid curiosity. An Omega being summoned to the Alpha King's private chambers could mean only one thing in their minds, and the weight of their judgment pressed down on her like a physical force. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, but the guard was already turning away. "The Alpha King doesn't make mistakes," he said over his shoulder. "Don't keep him waiting." The walk through the compound felt like a march to her execution. Every wolf she passed stopped to watch, their whispers following her like a toxic cloud. She caught fragments of their speculation, words that made her cheeks burn with shame, even though she had done nothing wrong. Always knew she was a whore. Probably offered herself to him. Disgusting Omega, seducing the Alpha King. By the time she reached the main building, her hands were shaking and her wolf was pressed so low in submission that she could barely feel her own heartbeat. The guard led her through hallways lined with portraits of former alphas, their painted eyes seeming to judge her as she passed beneath them. Everything about this place spoke of power and privilege, of a world so far above her station that she felt like a trespasser just by breathing its air. The Alpha King's chambers were located in the tower's highest floor, behind doors carved with symbols of his authority. The guard knocked once, received permission to enter, then gestured for Kira to step inside, before closing the door behind her with a finality that made her stomach lurch. The room was nothing like she had expected. Instead of the opulent display of wealth she had imagined, it was surprisingly simple. A large desk covered with maps and documents dominated one side of the space, while a sitting area with worn leather chairs occupied the other. The walls were lined with books and weapons, tools of both knowledge and warfare arranged with military precision. Alpha King Darius stood with his back to her, looking out through tall windows at the compound below. He had removed his ceremonial armour and wore simple dark clothing that somehow made him appear even more imposing than before. The setting sun painted his profile in shades of gold and shadow, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the controlled power that radiated from every line of his body. "Do you know why I asked you here, Kira?" The sound of her name in his deep voice sent shivers down her spine. She forced herself to speak, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "No, Your Majesty?" He turned then, fixing her with those storm-dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls of invisibility. The intensity of his gaze made her want to look away, but something about the moment held her frozen in place. "What happened in the beast pens today?" he said, moving closer with predatory grace. "That was not normal." "I don't understand, Your Majesty." "Don't you?" He stopped just close enough that she could smell the scent of pine and winter storms that clung to his skin. "Fenris has been my companion for 12 years. He has never, not once, shown submission to anyone but me. Today, he bowed to you like you were his alpha." Kira's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to find words that might explain the inexplicable. "The beasts have always been comfortable with me, Your Majesty. I think they can sense that I mean them no harm." "Comfortable." He repeated the word as if it tasted strange on his tongue. "Is that what you call it when every war beast in the compound recognizes you as something more than human?" "I'm not more than anything," Kira said quickly, panic making her voice sharp. "I'm nobody, Your Majesty. I'm nothing. I don't know why they react to me the way they do, but it doesn't mean—" "Stop!" The command was quiet but absolute, cutting through her babbled denials like a blade. "Stop telling me you're nothing." The words hung in the air between them, charged with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. Something was happening here, something she didn't understand and couldn't control. Her wolf, that weak and pathetic creature that had never stirred for any male, was suddenly pressing against her consciousness with an awareness that terrified her. "You felt it too," the Alpha King said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When our eyes met, when Fenris chose you, you felt something." Kira wanted to deny it, wanted to lie and protect herself from whatever this was leading to, but the truth spilled out before she could stop it. "Yes," she breathed. "What did you feel?" "I don't know." Her voice broke on the words. "I don't know what it was, but it was like recognition, like something in me knew something in you, and I don't understand how that's possible, because you're you and I'm—" "What are you, Kira?" The question stopped her cold. What was she? An omega without a family, a servant without worth, a nobody who spent her days cleaning up after creatures more valued than she was. "I'm nothing," she whispered, falling back on the only truth she had ever known. "No." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his dark eyes, close enough that his presence surrounded her like a living thing. "You're not nothing. Something that is nothing doesn't make Fenris bow. Something that is nothing doesn't make every war beast in my service recognize its authority." "I don't have any authority," Kira protested, but her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. "Then explain this." He held up his hand, palm facing outward, and Kira gasped. Golden light was emanating from his skin, barely visible, but unmistakably there. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, warm and alive, and calling to something deep inside her that she had never known existed. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough with confusion and something else she couldn't identify. "I've never experienced anything like it, but it started the moment I saw you, and it's been growing stronger ever since." Kira stared at the light dancing across his palm, mesmerized by its beauty and terrified by what it might mean. Without conscious thought, she found herself lifting her own hand, drawn by an instinct older than reason. The moment their palms touched, the world exploded into sensation. Power rushed through her like lightning, awakening parts of herself she never knew existed. Her wolf surged to the surface with a strength that staggered her, no longer the weak and pathetic creature she had always known, but something fierce and wild and impossibly strong. The golden light flared brighter, surrounding them both in warmth that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering in the cold. "Impossible," the Alpha King breathed, but he didn't pull away. If anything, he pressed closer, his fingers interlacing with hers as the power flowed between them like a living river. Kira felt tears streaming down her cheeks, though she couldn't say if they were from joy or terror or the overwhelming intensity of whatever was happening to her. Every cell in her body was singing with recognition, with a sense of rightness that she had never experienced in her entire life. This was what she had been searching for without knowing she was searching. This was the missing piece that had made her feel incomplete, the answer to a question she had never been able to articulate. But it was impossible. She was nobody. He was the Alpha King. He was promised to Lady Seraphina, bound by political necessity to choose a mate worthy of his station. This could never be anything more than a moment of madness, a brief glimpse of something that could never exist in the real world. "We can't," she whispered, even as every fibre of her being screamed in protest at the idea of pulling away. "I know," he said, his voice heavy with the same pain that was tearing her apart. But neither of them moved. Neither of them broke the connection that blazed between them like a star being born. For just a moment longer they stood frozen in impossible recognition, two souls touching across the vast chasm that separated their worlds. Then reality crashed back down around them like an avalanche. The Alpha King stepped back, breaking the contact, and Kira nearly cried out at the loss. The golden light faded, leaving her feeling hollow and bereft, as if part of her soul had been torn away. "This cannot happen," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I know," Kira whispered, wrapping her arms around herself to hold in the warmth that was already fading. "I am bound by duty, by the needs of my people. I cannot choose based on—" He gestured helplessly at the space where the light had been. "Whatever this is." "I understand, Your Majesty." "Do you?" His eyes found hers, dark and tormented. "Do you understand that I would give up my crown, my kingdom, everything I am, just to touch you again? Do you understand that in the space of one day you have become more important to me than the throne I have spent my entire life building?" The raw honesty in his voice broke something inside her chest, releasing a pain so sharp she could barely breathe through it. "Don't," she begged. "Please don't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes it hurt worse." The words tore themselves from her throat. "Because it makes me hope for things that can never be." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. "The bonding ceremony is tomorrow night," he said finally. "I know. I will choose Lady Seraphina. It is what is expected, what is needed for the stability of the Northern Territories." "I know," Kira repeated, each word like swallowing broken glass. "And this," he gestured at the empty air between them, "this never happened." "I understand, Your Majesty." But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. "Kira." She looked back, seeing him silhouetted against the dying light of the sunset, powerful and untouchable and infinitely sad. "If things were different," he said quietly, "if I were not who I am and you were not who you are, if we lived in a world where choice mattered more than duty—" "But we don't," Kira said, her voice steady despite the tears still streaming down her cheeks. "No," he agreed, "we don't." She left him there, standing alone in his tower, and walked back through the compound with her head held high, despite the whispers that followed her. Let them think what they wanted. Let them believe their cruel assumptions. It didn't matter anymore. Tomorrow the Alpha King would choose his Luna. Tomorrow the golden light would fade into memory. Tomorrow she would go back to being nothing, and he would go back to being everything. But for one impossible moment, they had touched something real, something that felt like destiny, something that could never be. The dreams came that night like memories that belonged to someone else. Kira found herself running through ancient forests under a silver moon, her paws not feet, striking the earth with a rhythm that spoke of power and birthright. In the dream, her wolf was not the weak, pathetic creature she had always known, but something magnificent and terrible, silver-white fur gleaming like starlight as she raced between towering pines that had stood since the world was young. Other wolves ran beside her, their forms barely visible in her peripheral vision, but their presence felt familiar in ways that made her sleeping heart ache. They called to her in voices that carried across centuries, words in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood perfectly. "Come home, daughter of the moon, come home and claim what was stolen." She woke with tears on her cheeks and the taste of pine needles in her mouth, her wolf stirring with an agitation that had been building since her encounter with the Alpha King. The pale morning light filtering through her small window felt harsh after the gentle silver glow of the dream forest, and reality crashed down on her with crushing weight. Today was the bonding ceremony. Today, Darius would choose Lady Seraphina as his Luna, and everything Kira had felt in his chambers would become nothing more than a painful memory. She dressed quickly in her worn servant's clothes and made her way to the beast pens, hoping that work would quiet the restless energy thrumming through her veins. But as she approached the enclosures, she found someone waiting for her in the pre-dawn shadows. Elderess Mira stood near Fenris's cage, her ancient hands folded within the sleeves of her ceremonial robes. The pack's oracle was a figure of mystery and reverence, old enough to remember the time before the current Alpha's rule, wise enough that even the strongest warriors sought her counsel. She had never spoken directly to Kira before, had never acknowledged her existence beyond the occasional nod of recognition. "Child," the elderess said, her voice carrying the weight of years and secrets, "we need to speak." Kira's blood chilled. If the pack oracle wanted to talk to her, it could only mean trouble. "Elderess, I haven't done anything wrong. If this is about yesterday you touched power that has been sleeping for decades," Mira interrupted, her sharp eyes studying Kira with uncomfortable intensity. Yesterday, the beasts recognized something in you that you yourself do not yet understand. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, girl. I have walked in the space between dreams and waking for more years than you have been alive. I know when the old blood stirs, when ancient magic awakens from its slumber. The elderess moved closer, and Kira caught the scent of herbs and moonlight that always seemed to cling to the oracle's robes. "Show me your shoulder." "My shoulder?" "The left one, where the mark rests." Kira's hand flew instinctively to her left shoulder, where a birthmark had always rested just below her collarbone. She had been self-conscious about it as a child, the strange silvery pattern that looked almost like writing in a language that didn't exist. The other children had mocked it, called it a slave mark or demon's brand, until she learned to keep it hidden beneath her clothes. "I don't understand," Kira whispered, but her fingers were already moving to the neckline of her simple dress. "The mark, child. Let me see it." With trembling hands, Kira pulled the fabric aside, revealing the birthmark that had been her secret shame for 18 years. But as the morning light touched her skin, she gasped in shock. The mark was glowing. Faint silver light pulsed beneath her skin, tracing the intricate patterns that had always looked like script from another world. The glow was subtle, barely visible in the growing daylight, but unmistakably there. "The royal bloodline mark," Elderess Mira whispered, her voice filled with something that might have been awe. "I thought they were all lost. I thought the silver wolves were extinct." "What are you talking about?" Kira's voice cracked with fear and confusion. "What silver wolves? What royal bloodline?" The elderess was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes fixed on the glowing mark with an expression Kira couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her words changed everything. "Your grandmother was Queen Lyralee Silvermoon, last of the Silver Wolf royal line. She ruled the Northern Territories before the Great Purge, before her family was hunted to extinction by those who feared their power." The world tilted around Kira, reality reshaping itself in ways that made no sense. "That's impossible. I'm nobody. I'm an orphan, a servant. I don't have a family." "You were hidden," Mira continued, her voice steady despite the earth-shaking revelation she was delivering. "Your parents died protecting the secret of your bloodline, died to keep you safe from those who would kill you simply for existing. The power was bound when you were an infant, locked away so completely that even you forgot what you truly were." "No." Kira shook her head violently, backing away from the elderess and her impossible words. "No, you're wrong. I'm not special. I'm not royal. I'm just—" "The wolves know," Mira said quietly. "They remember what your bloodline represents. They remember the silver wolves who could speak to all creatures, who could command the loyalty of beasts through will alone." Fenris chose that moment to let out a low, mournful howl, as if he understood the conversation taking place just beyond his reach. The sound was taken up by the other war beasts, their voices joining in a haunting chorus that spoke of loss and recognition and ancient grief. "The binding is breaking," the elderess observed, watching as the silver glow beneath Kira's skin pulsed brighter. "Contact with your true mate has awakened the power that was locked away. Soon, nothing will be able to contain what you truly are." "True mate?" The words escaped Kira's lips as barely more than a whisper. "The Alpha King," Mira said simply. "The golden light you shared with him, the recognition that passed between you, that was the mate bond calling out to be completed. His power called to yours, and yours answered despite all the barriers that have kept it hidden." Kira sank to her knees in the dirt, overwhelmed by revelations that shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. If what the elderess said was true, if she really carried royal blood, if she was truly the Alpha King's destined mate— "It doesn't matter," she said, her voice hollow with despair. "Even if it's true, even if I am what you say I am, it doesn't change anything. He has duties, obligations. He will choose Lady Seraphina tonight, and I will still be nothing." "Will you?" The elderess knelt beside her, placing one gnarled hand on Kira's shoulder. Or will you claim what is yours by right of birth and blood and destiny? I don't know how. The power is already returning, Mira said, her fingers tracing the glowing patterns on Kira's skin. Feel it stirring in your wolf, growing stronger with each passing hour. By sunset, the binding will be completely broken. By the time the ceremony begins, you will be everything your bloodline was meant to be. As if summoned by the elderess's words, Kira's wolf surged against her consciousness, no longer weak and submissive, but fierce and proud and blazing with silver fire. She could feel the change beginning, power unfurling in her chest like wings spread wide for the first time. But beware, the oracle continued, her voice taking on the cadence of prophecy. Lady Seraphina knows something stirs, she senses a threat to her plans, and she will not hesitate to eliminate competition. You are in danger, child, more danger than you can possibly imagine. Even as the words left Mira's lips, Kira felt eyes watching from the shadows of the compound. Hostile eyes filled with malice and calculation. Lady Seraphina's supporters were everywhere, and if they suspected what was awakening in the forgotten Omega. What do I do? Kira asked, fear and power warring in her voice. Survive until sunset, the elderess said simply. Let the power return completely, and then... She smiled, and for the first time, Kira saw something predatory in the old woman's expression. Then you show them all what it means to threaten a daughter of the Silver Wolf line. The howls of the war beasts rose around them like a battle cry, and Kira felt something ancient and fierce awaken in her blood. She had spent 18 years believing she was nothing, accepting the cruelty and dismissal as her rightful place in the world. But if the elderess spoke truth, if she really was the descendant of queens... The silver light beneath her skin pulsed brighter, and her wolf raised its magnificent head for the first time in her life. Power flowed through her veins like liquid moonlight, whispering of birthright and destiny and a crown that had been waiting decades to be reclaimed. Tonight, the Alpha King would hold his ceremony. Tonight, he would stand before the assembled packs and choose his Luna from among the worthy daughters of noble families. But tonight, for the first time in generations, a silver wolf would walk among them, and everything would change. The attack came at feeding time, when the beast pens were empty, except for Kira and the creatures that had become her only friends. She should have seen it coming. Should have noticed the way the usual handlers had found excuses to be elsewhere, should have questioned why she was suddenly alone with tasks that normally required 3 people. But the power thrumming through her veins had made her careless, the silver light beneath her skin growing stronger with each passing hour until she could barely think past the pressure building in her chest. The binding was breaking faster than Elderess Mira had predicted. Kira was pouring grain into the feeding troughs when she heard the first growl behind her, low and menacing in a way that made every hair on her body stand on end. She turned slowly, her heart already racing, to find 3 rogue wolves emerging from the shadows between the enclosures. They weren't pack members. These wolves bore the scars and lean build of outcasts, the kind of desperate criminals who sold their services to anyone willing to pay for blood. Their eyes held no recognition, no hesitation, only the cold calculation of predators who had been hired to kill. "Lady Seraphina sends her regards," the largest one said, his voice rough with years of violence. "Nothing personal, Omega. You're just in the way." Kira's wolf exploded to the surface with a force that staggered her, no longer the weak creature she had known, but something magnificent and terrible that blazed with silver fire. Power coursed through her like liquid lightning, awakening instincts she had never possessed and reflexes honed by generations of royal blood. The first attacker lunged before she could fully process what was happening, his shifted form a blur of grey fur and snapping teeth aimed at her throat. But instead of the helpless victim he expected to find, he met something that made him howl in shock and terror. Kira's shift happened without conscious thought, her human form dissolving into something that had been sleeping in her bloodline for decades. Silver-white fur erupted across her skin as bones lengthened and reformed, her spine extending as her face pushed forward into a muzzle filled with teeth that gleamed like starlight. She was magnificent. Where her wolf had always been small and unremarkable, the creature that stood in her place was massive, easily matching the size of the Alpha King's own beast. Her fur shimmered like moonlight on water, and her eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of ancient magic and royal power. The rogue wolves stumbled backward in shock, their planned ambush turning into something they had never expected. This wasn't the weak Omega they had been hired to eliminate. This was something out of legend, something that should have been extinct. "Impossible," one of them breathed. "The silver wolves are gone. They're all dead." Kira's response was a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. She moved with fluid grace that seemed to slow time around her, every step precise and deadly as she closed the distance between herself and her attackers. The power flowing through her was intoxicating, filling her with a confidence she had never known and abilities that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. The first rogue tried to circle behind her, but she was already turning, her massive paw striking him across the muzzle with enough force to send him tumbling into the side of a feeding trough. The second came at her from the left, teeth aimed at her flank, but she caught him mid-leap and threw him aside like he weighed nothing. But it was the third attacker, the leader, who made the mistake that sealed all their fates. He went for her throat while she was occupied with his companions, launching himself at her with killing intent blazing in his eyes. It should have been a perfect strike, the kind of coordinated attack that had made their reputation in the criminal underworld. Instead, he found himself caught in jaws that could have crushed stone, held helpless as silver fire blazed around them both. Kira could have killed him, should have killed him, if the rage burning in her chest was any indication. But something in her royal blood demanded more than simple vengeance. It demanded justice. She released him with a contemptuous shake of her head, watching as he collapsed to the ground, gasping and broken, but alive. The message was clear. She was not the helpless Omega they had expected. She was something far more dangerous. The other two rogues struggled to their feet, their confidence shattered and their mission clearly failed. Fear radiated from them in waves as they finally understood what they had been hired to attack. "Tell Lady Seraphina," Kira said, her voice carrying easily despite her shifted form, "that the Silver Wolf bloodline is not as extinct as she believed." They fled without another word, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had emerged. But their presence had been witnessed by creatures whose loyalty could not be bought or intimidated. Every war beast in the compound had pressed against the front of their enclosures during the attack, their eyes blazing with protective fury as they watched their true alpha defend herself. Now they threw back their heads and howled, a sound of recognition and celebration that carried across the entire territory. The sound brought people running from every corner of the compound. Guards, servants, pack members, all drawn by the unmistakable call of the war beasts acknowledging their alpha. They arrived to find Kira standing in her magnificent silver form among the scattered remains of the attack, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. The first to arrive was Marcus, the beta's son who had tormented her that morning. His face went pale as he took in the scene, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the creature that had once cowered before his cruelty. "Kira," he whispered, as if afraid to believe what he was seeing. She shifted back to human form with fluid grace, her clothes somehow intact despite the transformation. The silver light beneath her skin was no longer hidden, glowing bright enough that everyone could see the royal bloodline mark blazing on her shoulder. "My name," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that made every person present drop their eyes in automatic submission, "is Kira Silvermoon, daughter of Prince Aldrich and Princess Celeste, granddaughter of Queen Lyra, last heir of the Silver Wolf bloodline." The silence that followed was deafening, Behind her, Fenris let out a sound that was part howl, part roar, expressing what everyone present was feeling, but afraid to voice. The legendary war beast pressed against his cage door, his golden eyes blazing with recognition and something that looked almost like relief. "Impossible," someone whispered, but the word lacked conviction. "The silver wolves were killed," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "The bloodline was destroyed in the Great Purge. Everyone knows—" "Everyone was wrong," Kira interrupted, stepping closer to him with predatory grace. "Some of us survived. Some of us were hidden, protected, kept safe until the day we were strong enough to reclaim what was stolen." The crowd parted as footsteps approached, and Kira turned to see Alpha King Darius striding toward them with his usual commanding presence. But there was something different about him now, something that made her newly awakened instincts sing with recognition. His eyes found hers across the space separating them, and she saw the exact moment he recognized what she had become. The golden light that had passed between them in his chambers flared to life again, visible to everyone watching as it danced in the air between them. "The mate bond!" Eldris Mira said, appearing at the edge of the crowd with satisfaction in her ancient voice. "The power has returned completely. The binding is broken." Darius stopped just out of arm's reach, his dark eyes blazing with emotions too complex to name. "You're hurt," he said, his voice rough with concern as he noticed the scratches on her arms from the attack. "I'm fine," Kira replied, but her heart was racing for entirely different reasons now. The mate bond was pulling at her like a physical force, urging her to close the distance between them, to touch him and complete the connection that blazed so visibly in the air around them. "Lady Seraphina," he said, and the name fell between them like a sword. She did this. It wasn't a question. The Alpha King was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He had seen the political manoeuvring, understood the threat that Kira represented to Lady Seraphina's carefully laid plans. The rogues confessed before they fled, Kira confirmed. They were quite clear about who hired them. Something dangerous flickered in Darius's eyes, and for a moment Kira saw the predator that lurked beneath his civilized exterior. "She dared to threaten my—" He stopped himself before completing the sentence, but everyone present understood what he had almost said. His mate. Lady Seraphina had tried to kill his mate. "The ceremony," Marcus said weakly, as if grasping for some sense of normalcy in a world that had just turned upside down. "Your Majesty, the bonding ceremony is tonight. Everyone is expecting me to choose a mate," Darius finished, his eyes never leaving Kira's face. "And I will." The golden light flared brighter between them, and Kira felt her wolf press against her consciousness with urgent need. The mate bond was complete now, unbreakable and undeniable, burning in the space between their souls like a star being born. Around them, the war beasts had fallen silent, waiting with the patience of creatures who understood that they were witnessing something that would reshape their world. The pack members whispered among themselves, their voices hushed with awe and fear and the terrible excitement of watching history unfold. But Kira had eyes only for the Alpha King, for the man who held her heart and her destiny in his powerful hands. The silver light beneath her skin pulsed in rhythm with the golden glow surrounding him, two halves of a whole that had been separated by politics and cruelty and lies. Tonight there would be a ceremony. Tonight the Alpha King would choose his Luna before the assembled packs. But the choice had already been made by forces far older and more powerful than political necessity. The silver wolf had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. The Alpha King's chambers felt different the second time Kira entered them, no longer a place of forbidden longing, but something that sang with rightness in her newly awakened soul. Darius had dismissed his guards with a single look, the kind of command that brooked no argument even from his most trusted advisers. The heavy doors closed behind them with a finality that made Kira's heart race, sealing them into a space where truth could finally exist without the crushing weight of political necessity. "Show me," he said without preamble, his voice rough with need and wonder. Kira didn't need to ask what he meant. The mate bond hummed between them like a living thing, demanding acknowledgement, demanding completion. She let the human mask fall away, allowed her true nature to blaze forth without the careful control she had maintained in front of the crowd. Silver light erupted from her skin, racing along the royal bloodline marks that were no longer hidden beneath fabric and shame. The power that had been locked away for 18 years poured forth like a river finally allowed to reach the sea, magnificent and terrible and absolutely right. Darius sucked in a sharp breath, his own power answering hers with golden radiance that made the air between them shimmer like heat lightning. When he reached for her, their connection exploded into sensation that staggered them both. This was nothing like the tentative touch they had shared before. This was recognition on a level that transcended human understanding, two souls that had been searching for their other half across lifetimes finally finding home. The mate bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, binding them together with threads of light that pulsed in rhythm with their shared heartbeat. Kira gasped, overwhelmed by the intensity of sensation flooding through the connection. She could feel his emotions as if they were her own, the fierce protectiveness and desperate need that had been tearing him apart since the moment their eyes first met. But beneath that surface storm was something deeper, something that made her wolf keen with recognition. Love, pure, absolute, undeniable love that had bloomed in the space of days and would endure for eternity. "I felt you dying," Darius whispered against her hair, his arms crushing her against his chest as if he could hold her safe through sheer force of will. "When they attacked you, I felt the bond screaming in agony. I've never been so terrified in my life." "I'm here," Kira breathed, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt as she anchored herself to his solid presence. "I'm safe. I'm yours." The words hung in the air between them, a confession and a promise and a revolution, all wrapped into 3 simple syllables. They both felt the truth of it resonate through the bond, settling into their souls like pieces of a puzzle, finally clicking into place. "The ceremony," Darius said, but his voice lacked any real conviction. "I know." Kira pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, seeing her own conflict reflected in their storm-dark depths. "Lady Seraphina, the Alliance, your duty to the pack." "My duty?" he repeated, and something bitter flickered across his expression. "Do you know what my duty has cost me? What it was going to cost me?" She waited, sensing that he needed to speak the words that had been burning in his chest. "I was going to bind myself to a woman who tried to have you murdered," he said, his voice heavy with self-disgust. "I was going to stand before the pack tonight and promise my life to someone who hired assassins to eliminate the one person who makes me feel alive." "You didn't know." "I should have known." His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness, thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize were falling. "The moment I saw you, I should have thrown duty to the wind and claimed what was mine. The moment Fenris chose you, I should have recognized what the bond was trying to tell me." Kira felt her heart break for him, for the impossible position that birth and responsibility had placed him in. You were trying to do the right thing. You were thinking of your people. "My people," Darius said quietly, "deserve a Luna who won't try to murder innocent servants to protect her political ambitions. They deserve a queen who understands that power exists to protect the vulnerable, not exploit them." The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with implication. Kira searched his face, hardly daring to hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that duty without honour is just cowardice wearing a crown." His voice strengthened, taking on the commanding tone that had led armies to victory. I'm saying that a true alpha protects his mate above all else, regardless of the political cost. Darius. His name fell from her lips like a prayer. The Silver Moon Alliance was worth more than whatever Seraphina's family could offer anyway, he continued, and Kira felt her world tilt on its axis. A bloodline that can command the loyalty of war beasts, that carries the power of the ancient royal houses? There's no political advantage more valuable than that. He was giving her a way to accept this without guilt, a rational justification for choosing love over duty. But Kira could see through the careful politics to the raw truth beneath. He would have chosen her regardless. Alliance or no alliance, power or no power, he would have chosen her because the mate bond made any other choice impossible. The pack will accept this, she asked, hardly daring to believe that happiness this profound could be real. The pack, Darius said with grim satisfaction, witnessed you defeat 3 rogue assassins in single combat while shifted into a form they thought was extinct. They saw the war beasts acknowledge you as their alpha. They're not stupid, Kira. They know power when they see it. And Lady Seraphina? Something predatory flickered in his dark eyes. Lady Seraphina attempted to murder my mate, in my territory, during my protection. She's lucky if exile is all she faces. The finality in his voice sent shivers down Kira's spine. This was the Alpha King in truth, the ruler who had united the northern territories through strength and will. Lady Seraphina had made the fatal mistake of threatening what belonged to him, and she would pay the price for that error. So what happens now? Kira asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Now, Darius said, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. We complete the bond properly. Now I claim my mate before the entire pack and dare anyone to question my choice. The ceremony will proceed exactly as planned, he interrupted, his voice taking on a note of dark amusement. I promised to choose my Luna tonight, and I will. It's not my fault if people made assumptions about who that choice would be. Kira laughed despite herself, the sound bright with relief and joy, and the kind of happiness she had never imagined could exist. You're going to cause quite a scandal. Good, Darius said, his lips curving in a smile that was pure predator. It's time this pack learned what happens when they underestimate a silver wolf. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and golden and absolutely right, binding them together in ways that no political marriage could ever match. When he kissed her, Kira felt the last of her walls crumble, the last of her careful defences swept away by the tide of connection flowing between them. She had spent 18 years believing she was nothing, accepting cruelty and dismissal as her natural place in the world. But this man, this alpha who could have chosen any woman in the territories, had looked at her and seen something worth claiming, something worth fighting for, something worth loving. I love you, she whispered against his lips, the words spilling out like a confession she could no longer contain. I love you too, he replied, and the bond between them flared so brightly that the entire room was bathed in silver and gold. My mate, my Luna, my queen. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and promise. Soon the ceremony would begin, and the pack would gather to witness their alpha's choice. They expected to see Lady Seraphina crowned as Luna, expected the political alliance that would strengthen their borders and secure their future. Instead, they would witness the return of a bloodline thought lost forever. They would see their alpha claim a mate chosen by fate itself, bound by power older than their kingdom and stronger than political necessity. Tonight, everything would change, and it would begin with 2 souls finally finding their way home to each other, their wolves singing in harmony as the mate bond settled into place, with the rightness of destiny fulfilled. The silver wolf had returned, and she belonged to the Alpha King, just as he belonged to her, for now and always and forever. The days that followed were a blur of revelations that rewrote everything Kira thought she knew about her past. Elderess Mira had taken it upon herself to educate the newly awakened princess in the history that had been stolen from her, and each lesson felt like recovering pieces of a shattered mirror. In the oracle's private chambers, surrounded by ancient texts and artifacts that hummed with power, Kira learned the truth about the bloodline that flowed in her veins. "Your grandmother, Queen Liralee, was the last to rule before the Great Purge," Mira explained, her gnarled fingers tracing symbols on a map that showed territories as they had existed decades ago. The Silver Wolves were not merely another royal house. They were the bridge between the human and beast worlds, the only bloodline that could speak to all creatures and command their loyalty through will alone. Kira studied the portrait Mira had produced from a hidden chest, seeing her own features reflected in the face of a woman who radiated power and grace. Queen Liralee's silver hair fell to her waist in waves, and her eyes held the same inner fire that Kira now saw when she looked in mirrors. "Oh, what happened to her?" "Fear," Mira said simply. The other houses grew jealous of the Silver Wolves' power, terrified of rulers who could command not just armies of men, but legions of beasts. They banded together under the pretense of protecting the realm from unnatural influence. But in truth, they simply wanted to eliminate a bloodline that made their own seem weak by comparison. The weight of that history settled on Kira's shoulders like a mantle she had never asked to wear. "And my parents? Prince Aldrich and Princess Celeste died protecting you when you were barely 2 years old," the elderess continued, her voice gentle with old grief. "They knew the Purge hunters were closing in, knew that discovery meant death for all 3 of you. Your father fought a dozen assassins while your mother completed the binding ritual that would lock away your power until you were old enough to survive its return." Kira touched the silver marks on her shoulder, feeling the echo of ancient magic that had kept her hidden for so long. "The binding is what made my wolf so weak." "Not weak," Mira corrected. "Camouflaged. Your mother was brilliant, child. She made your power appear as its opposite, made you seem like the weakest Omega when you were actually the strongest Alpha. It was the only way to keep you alive." The irony was almost too perfect. 18 years of believing herself worthless, of accepting cruelty and dismissal, all because her own mother's love had been so great that she sacrificed her daughter's happiness to ensure her survival. "How do you know all this?" Kira asked, overwhelmed by the scope of what had been hidden from her. "Because I was there," the oracle said quietly. "I was your grandmother's advisor, your parents' friend. I helped plan your escape, helped choose the family who would raise you with no knowledge of what you truly were." The revelation hit Kira like a physical blow. "You knew. All these years you knew who I was, and you let me suffer. You watched them treat me like nothing, and you said nothing." "I watched you survive," Mira said firmly. "I watched you grow strong in ways that had nothing to do with supernatural power. Compassion, resilience, the ability to find worth in yourself, despite what others told you. Those are qualities that cannot be taught, child. They must be earned through adversity." It still hurt. "I know." The elderess reached out to touch Kira's hand, her ancient eyes soft with sympathy. "I know it hurt, and I'm sorry for that pain. But would you change it, knowing what you know now? Would you trade the person you've become for an easier childhood?" Kira considered the question, thinking of the servant who had learned to see worth in creatures others dismissed, who had found strength in gentleness and power in compassion. That person had been forged in the crucible of hardship, tempered by cruelty until only the purest elements remained. "No," she said finally, "I wouldn't change it." "Good," Mira smiled, "because the woman you've become is exactly who this realm needs as its Lunar Queen." The training began that afternoon, and it was unlike anything Kira could have imagined. Darius had insisted on personally overseeing her education in combat and leadership, claiming that his Luna needed to be prepared for the challenges ahead. But Kira suspected he simply wanted an excuse to spend time with her, to strengthen the mate bond through shared activity and physical proximity. Not that she minded. Every moment in his presence felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering, and the connection between them grew stronger with each passing hour. "Your power is instinctive," he explained as they faced each other in the private training grounds behind the main compound. "You don't need to think about commanding the beasts. It's part of your nature, written into your bloodline. But combat requires strategy as well as strength." He moved like water-given form, demonstrating techniques that had been honed through years of warfare and leadership. Kira found herself mesmerized by the fluid grace of his movements, the controlled power that radiated from every gesture. "Focus," he said with amusement, clearly sensing her distraction through the bond. "We'll have time for that later. Right now, I need to make sure you can protect yourself if someone else tries what Serafina did." The reminder of the assassination attempt sobered Kira immediately. Lady Serafina had been exiled along with her supporters, banished from the territory with threats of execution if they ever returned. But exile didn't guarantee safety, and other enemies might be lurking in the shadows. "Show me," Kira said, settling into a defensive stance that felt surprisingly natural. What followed was the most intense physical education of her life. Darius was merciless in his instruction, pushing her to discover the full extent of her capabilities while ensuring she understood the tactical thinking behind every move. But there was intimacy in the lesson as well, a bonding that went beyond mere technique. When he corrected her stance, his hands on her body sent electricity through the mate bond that left them both breathless. When she successfully executed a complex maneuver, the pride in his eyes made her wolf preen with satisfaction. And when she pinned him to the ground in a move that surprised them both, the heat that flared between them nearly derailed the training entirely. "You're learning fast," he said, his voice rough as he looked up at her from his position beneath her. "I have excellent motivation," Kira replied, acutely aware of his body pressed against hers, of the way the mate bond hummed with approval at their proximity. "Kira." Her name was a warning and a plea. "I know," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Training first, everything else after." "Everything else," he agreed, his hands settling on her waist with possessive heat. "I like the sound of that." She could have stayed there forever, suspended in that moment of perfect connection, but the sound of approaching voices reminded them that they were not alone in the world. Kira rolled away from him with reluctance, both of them breathing harder than the physical exertion warranted. "Your Majesty," came a voice from the training ground entrance, "the preparation committee requests your presence for the final ceremony arrangements." The bonding ceremony. Tomorrow night, Darius would stand before the assembled packs and officially claim his Luna. The entire Northern Territories would witness the moment when everything changed, when the lost princess stepped out of the shadows and into her rightful place. "Tell them I'll be there shortly," Darius called back, his eyes never leaving Kira's face. "Are you ready for this?" he asked once they were alone again. Kira considered the question seriously. Was she ready to go from invisible servant to Luna Queen in the space of days? Was she prepared for the scrutiny and expectations that would come with claiming her heritage? "I don't know if anyone could be ready for something like this," she said honestly, "but I'm ready to try." "That's all anyone can ask," Darius said, pulling her into his arms for an embrace that felt like a promise. "We'll face it together. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we encounter, we'll handle them as a team." The mate bond pulsed with warmth and certainty, reminding them both that they were no longer alone. They had each other now, two halves of a whole that had finally found their way back together. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony, the formal claiming that would change their world. But tonight was theirs, a quiet moment of peace before the storm of politics and power and public scrutiny descended upon them. Tonight they could simply be Darius and Kira, two souls who had found their perfect match in each other. Tomorrow they would be Alpha King and Lunar Queen, ready to face whatever the future held, together. The combat arena had been built for spectacle, its circular stone walls rising 30 feet from the packed earth floor to accommodate the hundreds of witnesses who had come to see history unfold. Every major pack leader in the Northern Territories was present, their entourages arranged in the tiered seating according to ancient protocols of rank and alliance. The air hummed with anticipation and barely contained aggression, the scent of power and politics thick enough to choke on. This was more than a simple combat trial, it was a reckoning that would determine the future of their world. Kira stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena floor, listening to the crowd's roar above her head as she tried to steady her breathing. The ceremonial combat gear felt strange on her body, the reinforced leather and silver buckles a far cry from the simple servant's clothes she had worn just days ago. "The formal challenge has been issued," Eldris Mira said, making final adjustments to the protective braces on Kira's arms. "Lady Seraphina invokes the right of trial by combat to dispute your claim to the lunar position. I thought she was exiled." "Exile can be overturned by victory in formal combat," the oracle explained grimly. "It's an old law, rarely invoked, but Seraphina's family insisted on their right to reclaim honour through battle." Kira nodded, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. She had known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. Lady Seraphina would never accept defeat quietly, would never allow a servant to claim the position she considered her birthright. "She's been training with enhancement magic," Mira continued, her voice heavy with concern. "Dark rituals that boost physical abilities at the cost of one's soul. She'll be stronger, faster, more vicious than any natural wolf." "But not royal," Kira said quietly, touching the silver marks on her shoulder that blazed with inherited power. "Not born to this." "No," the Elderess agreed, "but desperation makes dangerous enemies. Be careful, child." Above them, a horn sounded, its deep note reverberating through the stone walls. The crowd's noise shifted, taking on the edge of bloodlust that always accompanied formal combat. Someone would leave this arena victorious, and someone would not leave at all. "It's time," Mira said. The gate mechanism groaned as it lifted, revealing the arena floor bathed in torchlight that cast dancing shadows across the packed earth. Kira stepped into the circle of light, her enhanced senses immediately cataloguing everything, from the placement of the witnesses to the scent of fear and excitement that rolled off the crowd in waves. On the opposite side of the arena, another gate opened to reveal Lady Seraphina in all her terrible beauty. The enhancements were immediately visible. Seraphina's always perfect features had taken on an inhuman quality, her movements flowing with predatory grace that spoke of magic pushing her body beyond natural limitations. Her eyes blazed with unnatural light, and when she smiled, Kira caught the gleam of teeth that had been sharpened to points. "Look what crawled out of the beast pens," Seraphina called, her voice carrying easily across the arena despite its conversational tone. "The little servant girl who thinks she can steal what belongs to her betters." Kira didn't respond, focusing instead on the way her opponent moved, cataloguing strengths and weaknesses with the tactical eye Darius had trained into her. The enhancements made Seraphina faster and stronger, but they also made her overconfident, convinced of her own superiority. "Combat rules are simple," the arena master announced, his voice magically amplified to reach every witness. "Shifted wolf form only. Fight to submission or death. Victory determines rightful claim to the lunar position." "To submission or death," Seraphina repeated, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I do hope you choose death, little Omega. It would save us all so much trouble." The horn sounded again, and both women began to shift. Seraphina's transformation was violent, her enhanced body contorting with supernatural speed as dark magic poured through her system. The wolf that emerged was larger than any natural creature, her fur black as midnight and her eyes blazing with malevolent fire. But when Kira shifted, the arena fell into stunned silence. Her silver wolf form was magnificent, easily matching Seraphina's artificial size with the natural power of royal bloodline. Silver fur caught the torchlight like captured starlight, and her eyes blazed with the ancient fire that had ruled these territories for generations. This was no enhanced mockery of power. This was the real thing, raw and beautiful and absolutely dominant. The war beasts penned around the arena's perimeter began to howl, their voices raised in recognition and celebration of their true alpha. The sound sent shivers through every person present, a reminder that the silver wolf bloodline had commanded loyalty through will alone. Seraphina attacked without warning, launching herself across the arena with supernatural speed aimed directly at Kira's throat. It should have been a killing blow, the kind of opening strike that ended battles before they truly began. Instead, Seraphina found herself thrown aside like a rag doll as silver power met dark magic and proved which was stronger. Kira hadn't even looked strained by the effort. She stood in the centre of the arena as Seraphina scrambled to her feet, radiating the kind of calm confidence that came from knowing exactly who and what she was. This wasn't just a fight for position. This was the universe correcting an imbalance that had existed for too long. "Ah, impossible!" Seraphina snarled, circling her opponent with frustrated rage. "You're nobody. You're nothing. I am noble-born, enhanced, perfect. You cannot be stronger than me." Kira's response was a sound that was part roar, part howl, pure royal command that made every wolf in the arena drop to their bellies in automatic submission. The only creature that remained standing was Seraphina, her artificial enhancements protecting her from the full force of the alpha call, but not from its meaning. The message was clear. There was only one true alpha in this arena, and it wasn't the pretender with borrowed power. What followed was less a battle than a lesson in the difference between artificial enhancement and natural dominance. Seraphina fought with desperate fury, throwing every trick and enhancement at her disposal into attacks that should have overwhelmed any normal opponent. But Kira wasn't normal, and each assault was met with responses that seemed to flow from some deep well of ancestral knowledge. She fought like her grandmother had fought, like generations of silver wolf queens before her, with the kind of tactical brilliance that couldn't be learned or enhanced. Every movement was precise, every counterattack perfectly timed, every defensive maneuver calculated to expend minimum energy while maximizing damage to her opponent. The crowd watched in awed silence as the servant they had dismissed proved herself worthy of the crown in ways that transcended mere physical combat. This was leadership in its purest form, strength tempered by wisdom, power guided by justice. When the end came, it was almost anticlimactic. Seraphina, exhausted by her own artificial enhancements and battered by attacks she couldn't counter, stumbled during what should have been a simple dodge. Kira was there instantly, jaws closing around her opponent's throat with just enough pressure to demonstrate that death was one heartbeat away. The arena held its collective breath. Kira could have killed her, should have killed her by the laws that governed formal combat. Lady Seraphina had certainly intended murder when she issued the challenge, had come here planning to end the threat to her ambitions permanently. Instead, Kira released her hold and stepped back, allowing her defeated opponent to live. The mercy was more devastating than any killing blow could have been. "I submit," Seraphina whispered, the words torn from her throat by the crushing weight of absolute defeat. The arena erupted. Every pack leader rose to their feet, howling acknowledgement of their new Luna's victory. The war beasts joined their voices to the celebration, their cries echoing off the stone walls in a symphony of recognition that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. But Kira had eyes only for one figure in the crowd. Alpha King Darius stood in the royal box, his face blazing with pride and love and fierce satisfaction. The mate bond hummed between them like a golden thread, carrying his emotions as clearly as if he had spoken them aloud. "Mine," the bond whispered, "mate, queen, forever." When she shifted back to human form, the silver marks on her skin blazed bright enough to be seen from the highest seats. Royal blood made manifest, power that couldn't be questioned or denied, destiny fulfilled at last. "Behold your Lunar Queen," Darius called, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "Kira Silvermoon, rightful heir to the ancient bloodline, victor in combat, my chosen mate." The formal claiming sent another wave of celebration through the crowd, but Kira barely heard it. She was already moving toward the royal box, toward the man who held her heart and her future in his powerful hands. They met in the center of the arena as tradition demanded, Alpha King and Lunar Queen before their assembled people. When Darius pulled her into his arms, the mate bond flared so brightly that golden and silver light filled the entire space. "My queen," he whispered against her hair. "My king," she replied, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones like coming home. The ceremony would continue for hours, formal recognitions and oath-swearing that would bind the Pax to their new Luna. But the important part was over, the questions settled in the most primal way possible. The silver wolf had returned, and she belonged exactly where she stood, in the arms of her mate, surrounded by people who finally saw her worth. The servant girl was gone forever. In her place stood a queen. The sacred grove had been prepared for centuries of ceremonies, its ancient oaks forming a natural cathedral that seemed to hum with the power of every bond that had been forged beneath their branches. Moonlight filtered through the canopy overhead, casting silver patterns on the moss-covered ground where Kira walked beside Darius toward the ceremonial altar. She wore the recovered regalia of the Silver Wolf bloodline, garments that had been hidden away since her grandmother's death and brought forth now to witness their return. The gown moved like liquid starlight around her, its fabric woven with threads that caught the moon's glow and transformed it into something magical. Behind them, the pack followed in procession, their voices raised in the ancient songs that bound Alpha to Luna for eternity. Every major house was represented, their leaders having sworn loyalty to the new Lunar Queen in ceremonies that would be remembered for generations. The war beasts padded silently at the edges of the procession, their golden eyes reflecting the torchlight as they served as honor guard for their true Alpha. "Are you ready for this?" Darius asked quietly, his hand warm and steady in hers as they approached the altar where Elderess Mira waited with the ceremonial chalice and binding cords. Kira looked at the man who had changed her world, who had looked at a servant girl and seen a queen. The mate bond hummed between them with contentment and anticipation, two souls preparing to be joined in the most sacred way their people knew. "I've been ready my entire life," she said. "I just didn't know it." The altar had been carved from a single piece of white stone, its surface polished smooth by centuries of ceremonies and marked with symbols that predated written history. Ancient magic pooled around its base like water, visible to those with the sight as ripples of silver and gold that danced in the air. Elderess Mira raised her voice in the ritual words that had been spoken at every mating ceremony since the founding of the Pax. "We gather under moon and stars to witness the joining of Alpha and Luna, the binding of two souls into one purpose, the creation of a bond that will endure beyond death itself." The crowd fell silent, every person present understanding that they were witnessing something profound. This wasn't merely a political alliance or a strategic marriage. This was destiny fulfilling itself, two halves of a whole finally coming together in the way the universe had always intended. "Darius Blackthorn," Mira continued, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the grove, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, do you come here freely to claim your mate?" "I do," Darius replied, his voice steady and sure. "I choose Kira Silvermoon as my Luna, my queen, my other half. I bind my life to hers, my power to hers, my future to hers, from this moment until the end of all things." "And you, Kira Silvermoon," the oracle continued, turning to face the woman who had risen from nothing to claim everything, "last daughter of the Silver Wolf bloodline, do you accept this bond freely given?" Kira felt the weight of history in the question, the echoes of all the queens who had come before her and all those who might come after. This moment would determine not just her future, but the future of their entire world. "I do," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sacred space. "I choose Darius Blackthorn as my mate, my king, my other half. I bind my life to his, my power to his, my future to his, from this moment until the end of all things." The words seemed to resonate in the very air around them, ancient magic responding to vows spoken with perfect truth. Golden light began to emanate from Darius, while silver radiance poured from Kira, the two energies swirling together in patterns that made the watching crowd gasp in wonder. "Then let the binding be made complete," Mira declared, lifting the ceremonial chalice that had been filled with sacred wine, blessed under the full moon. She offered it first to Darius, who drank deeply before passing it to Kira. The wine tasted of starlight and promises, of power older than memory and love stronger than death. When she lowered the chalice, the bond between them flared so brightly that the entire grove was bathed in aureate radiance. By blood and wine, by moon and stars, by choice freely given and bond willingly accepted, the oracle intoned, binding their hands together with cords that had been woven from the hair of previous lunar queens. "I declare you mated for life. Let all who witness know that these two are one, bound by power that cannot be broken and love that will endure beyond the ending of the world." The pack erupted in celebration, their voices raised in harmony that seemed to make the very trees sing. But Kira had attention only for the man whose life was now bound to hers in ways that transcended mere ceremony. When Darius kissed her, the mate bond completed itself with a surge of sensation that left them both breathless. She could feel his emotions as clearly as her own, could sense the fierce love and protective instincts that drove him, the absolute certainty that she was his perfect match in every way that mattered. "My Luna," he whispered against her lips, "my queen, my everything." "My Alpha," she replied, marvelling at how right the words felt. "My king, my heart." The celebration continued long into the night, with feasting and dancing, and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something truly magical. Pack members who had dismissed Kira just days ago now approached her with reverence, seeking the blessing of their new lunar queen and offering their loyalty with genuine respect. But eventually, tradition demanded privacy for the newly mated pair. They withdrew to chambers that had been prepared for this night, rooms that had been blessed and warded to give them the solitude they needed to complete their bond in the most intimate way possible. The space was lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on walls, hung with tapestries depicting the history of their bloodlines, a reminder of the legacy they now carried together. "Do you regret it?" Darius asked as they stood together in the candlelight, still dressed in their ceremonial garments, but finally, blessedly alone. "Giving up the quiet life for all of this?" Kira considered the question seriously. Just a week ago, she had been invisible, forgotten, dismissed by everyone who saw her. Now she was Lunar Queen, bound to the most powerful alpha in the territories, responsible for the welfare of thousands of wolves who looked to her for guidance and protection. "I was never meant for a quiet life," she said finally. "I was meant for this, for you, for all of it." "Even the politics and the ceremony and the constant scrutiny?" "Especially those," she laughed, surprising them both. Do you know what I realised tonight watching everyone celebrate? I'm not afraid anymore. For 18 years I was terrified that people would see me, really see me, and find me lacking. But now they see everything I am, and they bow. Darius pulled her closer, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. They bow because you're worthy of their respect, because you've earned it through strength and compassion and the kind of grace that can't be taught. I earned it by surviving long enough to find you, she corrected, by being exactly where I needed to be when you needed me to be there. Destiny, he murmured, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Destiny, she agreed. When he began unlacing the ceremonial gown with reverent fingers, Kira felt no nervousness, no uncertainty. This was right in the same way that breathing was right, as natural and necessary as the bond that connected their souls. They came together with the patience of people who had eternity ahead of them, exploring each other with hands and lips and whispered endearments that only they would ever hear. The physical joining was transcendent, their bodies moving together with perfect synchronization, while their souls merged in ways that left them both changed forever. The mate bond sang with completion, silver and gold light dancing around them as they claimed each other with desperate tenderness and fierce joy. Later, as they lay entwined in the aftermath of their bonding, Kira traced patterns on Darius's chest and marvelled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. I used to dream about being someone else, she admitted quietly. Someone worthy of love, someone who mattered. I never imagined I was already both of those things. You were always worthy, Darius said, his arms tightening around her. You were always precious. You just needed someone who could see it. And you needed someone who could see past the crown to the man underneath. We saved each other, he said simply. Outside their chambers, the pack continued their celebration, but inside, two souls rested in the perfect peace that comes from finding your other half. The servant girl was gone forever, transformed into a queen who would rule with wisdom and compassion. The lonely Alpha King had found his match, his equal, his completion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new tests of their strength and resolve. But tonight was theirs alone, a perfect moment of happiness that would sustain them through whatever difficulties lay ahead. The Silver Wolf had returned to claim her throne, and she would never be alone again.